The story begins as a boy named Takudo plays a video game in the hospital. He gets tired and falls asleep, but when he wakes up, he finds himself in an unfamiliar forest. Having spent a long time in the hospital bed, he likes the fresh air of this place. But a girl suddenly arrives there, and Takudo recognizes her as Atu. Takudo explains that Eternal Nations is the game he kept playing while he was bedridden, and it's an empire management simulator set in a dark fantasy world. He can't believe that he's in his favorite game with his favorite character. Atu calls him king, and he wonders if he should roleplay, but seeing him confused, Atu assures him that it's alright. She reveals that he was the first to clear nightmare difficulty using the toughest civilization, Minagra, the civilization of ruin. Atu notes that his brilliant strategies have placed him at the top of the official leaderboards, and she calls him the legendary player Takudo. He wonders how she knows this, and Atu mentions that she remembers every word that he said to her. Takudo tells her that perhaps he used her as his character because he wanted to become strong like her, and he is glad that they're able to talk face to face. She is also glad to meet him, and he wonders if this is heaven, asking if she is the one who summoned him to this world. Atu informs him that she also suddenly found herself in this place, but she doesn't think that it's heaven because it looks more like the world of Eternal Nations. Atu thinks it's a miracle, and she is just happy to meet him. She says that she has no idea what this place is, but she just wants him to start over with her and build an empire just for the two of them. Takudo is also clueless about this place, and he has no idea what's going on, but since he is already here, he wants to do it again. He wishes to recreate his blissful days, and he agrees with Atu's idea of building a nation just for the two of them. Atu then gets into character, telling him that she will serve him from this point on, but Takudo thinks it's embarrassing to act like this in real life, which she agrees. Takudo confidently declares her his only vassal and confidant, and he tells her that although everyone calls them the most evil empire, they specialize in internal affairs, so they both believe they should shut in. After that, Takudo summons a long-legged bug as a scout, using emergency production, but they both find it disgusting. He explains that Minagra is a peaceful civilization that governs over evil and ruin, so they need to act with that in mind. Atu realizes that it means they must avoid being detected early in the game, which Takudo agrees with. He commands the scout to gather information on the surrounding area, and she reminds it not to disappoint their king, so it immediately rushes out. Atu is glad to see that it listens to orders, and Takudo thinks that it's just like the game, stating that he can also see the scout's vision to some extent. Takudo reveals that they had a total of 200 MP, and he used 100 MP to summon the scout, while it will cost them 20 MP to set up their initial base. Atu thinks the emergency production is costly, and Takudo tells her that he wanted to summon a warrior, but he can't do that with their limited mana. She feels sorry because normally she would be confident in taking care of things in the fighting department, but since they are starting afresh, she is not strong enough right now. He states that she is from the hero unit, so she will grow stronger with time, but right now her level is only 3, and if a powerful enemy shows up, their empire will be destroyed. Takudo thinks the difficulty level is quite high, which worries him, but she asks him to cheer up. Meanwhile, the scout continues to check the surroundings, and Takudo gets a general idea of the area around him. He is surprised that there is nothing but trees out there, and Atu thinks trees are good for hiding, but she also finds it strange that there are no signs of wildlife. Takudo informs her that there is also no food here, so they will have to continue scouting for a while. Atu apologizes that she can't be of more help in this, and he mentions that it's fine because it's already a huge help to have her by his side. She is extremely happy to hear it, and he is surprised to see this side of her because he couldn't grasp her personality in the game. Takudo suddenly sees a dark elf settlement through the scout's vision, and he notices that they are all gathered not too far from their location. After learning about the presence of dark elves, Atu realizes they are really in the fantasy world, but it's a bit of relief as dark elves tend to be neutral, leaning a bit towards evil. Takudo wonders if this means that they are in the world of Eternal Nations, and he thinks that it would be bad if this were someone else's starting territory. He wants to avoid war right now, and he thinks that they should do their best to stay hidden for the time being. Takudo mentions that bordering another empire is the worst thing that can happen to them, but Atu tells him not to worry, stating that they can just run away in the worst case scenario. He agrees with her and mentions that their kingdom loves peace, so they should just first gather more intel on the area, and if things look bad, they can run away. As they are still celebrating their new strategy, they are disturbed by the sudden arrival of some dark elves there. The scene shifts to the past, where we see the same group of dark elves who met Takuto roaming around the forest in search of food. The group members tell their captain, Gia, that they should just leave the cursed lands, but he reminds them that they have no other option, since they were already driven out of their land and they have nowhere else to go. He doubts that the children can endure this any longer, and he is sure that there must be food somewhere around here, as there is a lot of vegetation in this place. One of his team members named Emily explains that the lands are a sea of trees stretching across the edge of Idaragia's uncharted territory, and ancient texts say that something evil is sealed in these lands, which doesn't allow life to prosper here. Gia thinks this is just a superstition, and he mentions that the trees here are really dense, and he is sure that they can find something to eat. Gia states that they shouldn't give up hope, believing that the spirits of their ancestors are going to show them the way to overcome this trial. He agrees that this forest is unsettling, but he doesn't have the option to turn back for the sake of his people. Just then, he comes across Takuto, and he notices he is surrounded by darkness, which scares him as he believes Takuto is dangerous and pure evil. Gia thinks one wrong move and his entire race will be wiped out, so he decides to kneel before him. He introduces himself as Captain Gia of the Dark Elves clan called Mazaram. He mentions that he can sense Takuto is a powerful and noble being, so he apologizes for trespassing on his lands. Atu is glad to see that they understand what it means to set foot here, and she wonders what made them break the taboo of coming there. Gia explains that their clan once resided in the central lands of Idaragia, but as he is blabbering about how he got there, Atu tells him that she doesn't have the time for this, asking him to cut to the chase and get straight to the point. He reveals that they were chased out of their lands, and they had nowhere else to go, so they came to this forest. Takuto asks them if they are hungry, which surprises Gia, but Atu tells him to answer, so he mentions that their persecution was so severe that they had to flee, leaving behind all their belongings. They ran out of food along the way, and they haven't eaten in days. He wonders why they have to endure cruelty like this, thinking that they have done nothing wrong and all they want is a safe place to live. Just then, Takuto summons some apples, and he tells them to eat, but it's the first time the elves are seeing apples, so Gia wonders if he should start eating immediately, but he thinks it might look offensive. However, he notices his teammates eating the fruits without any worries, and they seem to be enjoying it. Takuto gives them some pears as well, and Atu asks Gia to enjoy the food her master has given them, but Gia bows down, asking if he can take these fruits to the ones left behind, as there are children among them who haven't eaten for days. Takuto hears his plea and gives them more food, which shocks Atu as she doesn't like him wasting his powers like that. After seeing his kindness, Gia thinks about how the Dark Elves are a reviled race that fled from the light, and it was only through the mercy of the elves that they were even allowed to survive. They have endured so many difficulties, and they are forced to live in places untouched by light. He believes no one has ever reached out to them like this, and they all thank Takuto for his gift, thinking it all seems to be a miracle. Gia asks him who he is, but Takuto doesn't answer, and simply tells them that the food belongs to them now. Meanwhile, we see that the other Dark Elves are starving, clinging to the hope that Gia is going to bring them something to eat. Just then, Gia and his group arrive, and they can smell the delicious fruits, which they all happily share with each other. One of them asks Gia how he managed to get this much food, so he mentions that they just happened to run into it, not telling her about Takuto. At night, as everyone is sleeping, we see Gia standing guard, and the village chief named Molter joins him. He mentions that the fruits that Gia brought back were very special, and even in his long life, he has never seen fruits like those. Gia agrees, and the elder asks what really happened. So Gia explains that they met the being of legends in the forest. The one Emily mentioned was sealed away in the accursed lands. The elder is surprised that he met the King of Ruin, and Gia inquires if he has heard of him. So Molter notes that he knows a bit about about him from the old texts and folktales. It is said that when the world becomes overpopulated, the King of Ruin will appear, and he will destroy everything in existence, returning the world to a clean slate. No one knows if this is true, but also no one can guarantee that it's false. He asks if the being named himself, but Gia states that it never did. But it did look as terrifying as the name suggests. The elder wonders if he spoke with the king, and Gia tells him about Atu, who conveyed the king's words to them. The elder is not sure if what he met was the King of Ruin, but whatever it was, it doesn't look good for their future. Molter explains that now that he has eaten and replenished his mana, he can feel that something is not right in this forest. He asks Gia what he gave in return for the food, so Gia tells him that the being asked for nothing, which surprises the old man, since no evil thing in this world gives something without taking something in return. Gia says that they just answered some of his questions, and he believes the King of Ruin lent them a hand out of benevolence. The old man can't believe it, so Gia once again tells him that he believes the Great One pitied them and gave them aid, but it enrages Molter, since they only use the title of the Great One for those they respect. Gia believes Takudo deserves the title, since he saved their lives by offering those fruits, but Molter thinks he is under some sort of spell. However, Gia rejects the idea, reminding the old man of the king's blessings on them, which gave them the strength to argue. He asks Molter that under these circumstances, what was he supposed to do? And even Molter doesn't know the answer to this question, so he just tells Gia that he did well. He mentions that, since he is their tribe's chief, in the future, he will handle negotiations with the king, and he is sure his experience will prove useful. On the other hand, we see Atu scolding Takudo for wasting his mana for the Dark Elves, and he states that he just felt bad for them. She tells him that he can't waste his mana when they are just starting out as a civilization, but Takudo asks her to cheer up, stating that he will do whatever she wants. Atu mentions that she is not that angry for him to grant her such a pleasure, and he states that he simply can't do this without her. It melts her heart, and she forgets her anger, so she starts apologizing for her rudeness. Atu tells him to command her as he sees fit. Then Takudo remembers that he couldn't really talk well with the Dark Elves. She mentions how she thought he was role-playing as a powerful being and letting his vassals do all the talking. His eyes fill with tears as he realizes that he is just socially awkward, recalling that he didn't have many people to talk to in his previous world. Right then, the scout bug returns and tells Takudo that the elves are heading back to the area. Takudo is caught off guard by their return, but he figures it makes sense after all. He gave them more food than they could carry during their last visit. He assumes they're back to collect the rest. With neighboring cultures so different from his own, conflict feels inevitable. Takudo really just wants the elves to grab the food and leave. He could demand they stay out of the forest, but that would mean having to talk to someone besides Atu, and he's not eager for that. Atu notices that Takudo is clearly bothered by the situation, so she proposes a solution. She'll take over all the negotiations on his behalf. This way, Takudo can maintain the image of a respectable king, rather than revealing his awkwardness. He thinks the idea sounds great, but hesitantly asks if it's really alright for her to handle everything. Atu reassures him that she's more than happy to help, and has no issue being his voice. A short time later, Molter and Gia arrive and kneel before Takudo. Molter introduces himself as the leader of the Dark Elf tribe and expresses his sincere thanks to Takudo for supplying his people with the much-needed food. He asks for the name of their savior so he can offer proper gratitude. After a quick glance to get Takudo's confirmation, Atu proudly declares that they stand before the King of Ruin, Takudo era. Gia is shocked to discover that Takudo is truly the legendary King of Ruin, but they must remain polite. Molter expresses gratitude once more for Takudo's generosity. Takudo, relieved that the discussions have proceeded smoothly, sees no reason for tension with the elves. Atu, however, urges them to take the supplies and leave immediately. Gia and Molter are both taken aback. They had assumed the King of Ruin would demand a steep price for his help, so they hesitantly ask Atu if they're truly allowed to leave without giving anything in return. Atu points out that they have nothing worthwhile to offer anyway. Molter is uneasy about leaving the debt unsettled. Dealing dealing with someone as powerful as the King of Ruin. The consequences could be dire, perhaps even their souls, but he keeps that fear to himself. Sensing the sudden rise in tension, Takuto pulls Atu aside for a private chat. Atu is clearly frustrated by how unyielding Molter is being, and she's convinced that if the elves are left to their own devices, they'll eventually become a problem. With that in mind, she bluntly suggests they eliminate all of them. But Takuto's real intention was to form a relationship that benefits both sides. He realized that Molter felt uneasy accepting help without giving anything in return, especially from someone with a title like the King of Ruin. So, Takuto proposes that they ask for a fair form of compensation to put Molter at ease. Atu agrees that it's a smart move and delivers Takuto's message to the elves. Molter visibly relaxes, though Atu is still trying to decide what kind of payment they should request. She looks to Takuto for guidance, and he suggests she inquire about the world beyond the forest. Following his lead, Atu informs Molter that in exchange for their aid, he must share his knowledge of the outside world with Takuto. Molter agrees, but Atu makes it clear that once he fulfills this request, he and his group must depart the forest without delay. However, this would leave the elves homeless once more. Molter pleads with Takuto to let them remain in the forest, but Atu swiftly shuts him down, warning that if he values his life, he must never reveal Takuto's existence. Gia opens his mouth to argue, knowing the dark elves won't survive if exiled, but Molter stops him, unwilling to provoke Takuto's wrath. As Gia and Molter are leaving, Takuto hesitates. Watching them go, he questions whether this is truly fair. He never wanted to cause the elves hardship. Then, he has an idea. Before they can disappear, he calls after them with an unexpected offer. He asks if they're willing to become citizens of his nation. The elves are so shocked by the proposal that they're left speechless. Even Atu is caught off guard and quickly pulls Takuto aside for another private chat, asking why he would say something like that. Takuto explains that he was considering bringing the dark elves into their fold through the refugee system. Once he puts it that way, Atu starts to see the logic and admits it might actually be a solid plan. Dark elves aren't naturally aligned with good or evil, so they wouldn't clash with Takuto's evil-leaning kingdom. On top of that, in the game, the main population of Minagra consisted of homunculi, so Takuto turns to Atu and asks if she truly wants to live in a kingdom where those are the only beings around. Now that Atu supports the idea, she addresses Molter and Gia directly. If they swear loyalty to Minagra, they'll gain Takuto's protection. Molter asks for clarification. She states plainly that aligning with Minagra means the dark elves will henceforth be branded as evil. The choice to join Minagra is entirely theirs, but Atu assures them that if they do, it will at least be an interesting experience. Sometime later, Takuto and Atu head to the dark elf camp. As the elves have finally reached a decision, Atu is slightly annoyed that it took them so long, but Takuto isn't surprised after all. Atu had warned them that joining Minagra would mean being seen as evil. Eventually, they reach the dark elf camp, and as soon as they arrive, Molter declares to everyone that their new king has come. The elves immediately kneel and make way for Takuto as he approaches the throne they've prepared for him. Some of them are visibly frightened upon seeing him for the first time, while others look thrilled. However, those who get too close are quickly overwhelmed and faint from the intense dark energy radiating off of him. Gia quickly warns everyone not to look directly at Takuto, fearing he might take it as a sign of disrespect, but Takuto himself isn't bothered by it. After he takes his place on the throne and the dark elves are assembled, Takuto formally announces that, starting today, everyone present is now a citizen of Minagra. And just like that, the dark elves become his people. Gia had honestly expected something more dramatic, especially since Atu mentioned they would turn evil. Suddenly, a surge of intense hatred floods into his body as he remembers all the wrongs done to him and his people. The same thing happens to the rest of the dark elf tribe. As the painful memories of their persecution resurface, a sense of relief and hope washes over them. They're genuinely grateful and excited to have someone like Takuto on their side. A few days pass in the newly founded kingdom of Minagra, but things are going terribly for Takuto. As he examines the map Molter gave him, he grows increasingly irritated. This has to be the worst starting point. Noticing his frustration, Atu asks him what's bothering him. He points at the map and describes how, north of the forest, lies the holy kingdom of Qualia, devoted to the god Arlos, and the elven realm of Elna, which reveres nature, both strongly aligned with good. good. If either discovered the existence of the evil nation of Minegra, Takudo and Atu would be doomed. They'd stand no chance in a direct battle against such formidable nations. To make things even harder, this cursed forest has no usable resources at all, making the situation brutally unfair. However, they now have the Dark Elves on their side, which should help compensate for the kingdom's current shortcomings. Just then, Atu notices the elves approaching, and her expression brightens, likely because they're bringing important news. A short while later, Molter and Gia show up, this time bringing Emily along. Gia explains that Emily is incredibly smart and knowledgeable about the cultures of foreign nations, so he's confident she'll be a valuable asset for Takudo's plans. Takudo appreciates the extra support, but he quickly notices how nervous they all seem around him, so he has Atu reassure them that there's no need to be so formal. Moving forward, Atu lets them know that Takudo has made some decisions about how Minagra will be run. Starting today, Molter and Gia will be assigned to important roles. Molter will be in charge of managing the nation's affairs, and according to what Atu has heard, he's capable of using magic, so she's counting on him to deliver. Gia will be named the supreme military commander of Minagra's forces, with complete command over all troops. Deeply honored, he vows to mercilessly crush anyone who opposes Takudo without hesitation. Takudo is slightly unnerved by Gia's intense demeanor and has Atu clarify that he favors peace, ordering them to avoid unnecessary aggression unless provoked. Atu dismisses everyone for now, instructing them to rest up before they start building shelters in the forest. Molter thanks her for the thought and tries to boost his image by claiming that his expertise makes him far more valuable than a simple warrior like Gia, but Gia immediately fires back, arguing that an old man like Molter won't be much help with building anything anyway. Atu ignores their argument, sensing their enthusiasm to get to work. She turns to Takudo and asks if they should begin construction right away. He agrees, suggesting they start gathering materials, but carefully, without harming the forest. Atu approves of the idea and checks with Molter, who confirms it's feasible as long as they build the houses primarily from the larger trees. Takudo is glad to hear it's possible, so he tells them to get started as soon as they can, but reminds them to reforest as they go. The three are ready to begin, but they pause. They don't know what Takudo means by reforesting. Takudo is taken aback by this, surprised they're unfamiliar with the concept, especially since, based on what he's heard, the people of this world should have already unlocked the fortress building. Atu asks if they're at least familiar with military magic or the 6 great elements, but Molter admits he's only ever heard of 4 great elements. Emily adds that it's unlikely anyone from the other nations would know about military magic anyway. This leads Takudo and Atu to conclude that the people of this world are much less advanced than they expected. The Dark Elves' magic technology, in particular, falls far short of Takudo's standards. Still, if the rest of the world is on the same level, Takudo believes they won't have too much trouble catching up. Atu explains the concept of reforestation essentially. It means planting new trees to replace the ones that are cut down, helping to preserve the forest. However, since trees usually take decades to grow on their own, in this context, reforestation refers to a special method that uses magical elements to speed up the process. She claims it's a technique personally developed by Takudo. Of course, that's a complete lie, since Takudo didn't invent that. Emily gets really excited at the thought that Takudo holds such impressive knowledge. She wonders if he was the one behind the creation of the apples he shared with them. She also mentions that she planted some of the grape seeds, and they've already started to sprout. She's thrilled to see how they'll turn out, but as soon as she brings up planting grape seeds, both Takudo and Atu fall completely silent, realizing they hadn't even thought about doing that themselves. In this world, fruits such as grapes and apples don't naturally exist, but Takudo managed to produce them using his emergency production skill. If his theory is correct, the ability isn't restricted to just creating food. To test this, he tries summoning a coin, and it appears without issue, just as he hoped. This breakthrough means that as long as he has enough mana, he can generate anything from gunpowder to base metals, even oil, and it's clear just how insanely overpowered that makes him. The Holy Empire has received reports of a sinister force lurking in the forest. In response, the Holy holy saint is dispatched to investigate, accompanied by a cardinal and a small group of knights. While the knights have heard tales of the saint's extraordinary abilities, she appears to them as nothing more than a normal girl. But when they come across a horde of goblins, she proves why she's held in such high regard by the church. According to the teachings of the god Arlos, vile creatures like goblins are considered a blight that must be purged. With a single motion of her staff, she incinerates them in a surge of divine fire, reducing them to ashes. The knights are left speechless by what they've just seen. The cardinal then explains that Selena's power is one of the key reasons the Empire has managed to uphold peace with the elves and repel the darkness threatening Ideragia. It's this very power that has earned her the title of one of the 7 great saints of the continent. Selena asks the cardinal if there have been any updates regarding the ominous presence she sensed in the accursed lands. However, the cardinal explains that he can't just deploy paladins to that region. In their country, expressing concern about the south is seen as absurd, and without a compelling reason, the central church would never authorize such an investigation. Selena informs the cardinal that if he refuses to dispatch any paladins, she'll investigate the matter herself. However, the cardinal forbids her, explaining that as a saint, her actions could damage the church's reputation. Seeing her determination, he reluctantly agrees to send some of his own soldiers to look into the situation. As he walks away, he is clearly annoyed by Selena's stubbornness. Meanwhile, over in Minegra, the Dark Elves have been diligently pushing forward with the construction work, and at last, the throne room is finished. Takuto is thrilled. No more sleeping under the stars, and with this milestone, his nation moves one step closer to conquering the world. Just then, Takuto's administrators arrive for their scheduled domestic affairs meeting. They bring good news: they've completed the design for the new outfit he requested. This lifts Takuto's spirits even more, as he was growing tired of wearing his pajamas all the time. Atu and the others are pleased to see how much Takuto loves his new outfit. But there are more urgent issues to address. They need to begin their meeting. However, Takuto is a bit preoccupied, still admiring his fresh look. Seeing this, Atu suggests they go ahead and start the meeting without him. First up, Molter turns to Atu and asks what buildings they should focus on next, since, aside from the throne room, not much else has been built. They've already taken care of the groundwork, clearing the area and trimming nearby branches. So Atu advises that they begin with a food production facility, as ensuring everyone has enough to eat is their most urgent concern. Molter questions why they even need to worry about food when Takuto can just create it with his powers. But Atu explains that they can't depend on him forever. What if he's not around one day? Molter concedes that she has a point. With that settled, Atu says it's time to get started and pulls out a strange-looking tree. Molter is shocked by what he sees and asks Atu what it is. She explains that it's a flesh tree. The name alone is unsettling, but the reality is even more disturbing. It's a strange tree that produces meat with a flavor identical to human flesh. Atu explains that this is just the first phase of their food production plan. But Molter, Gia, and Emily all agree that most people won't be eager to eat something that tastes like human flesh. Atu reassures them that they'll find other food sources in the future. In the meantime, they need a place to store the tree's meat, so Emily volunteers to build a storage facility. Next on their list is research, since they need cutting-edge technology to make rapid progress. Molter asks what type of tech they should focus on, and Atu tells him that magic-based technology is the key, especially magic designed for military use. Ordinary magic enables a person to strike a dozen or so enemies at a time, something Molter can already do. However, military magic is far more powerful, allowing attacks on thousands simultaneously and even altering the battlefield for strategic advantage. Molter is astonished to discover such magic exists and is eager to master it. Determined, he declares that he will oversee the research himself. The final item on the agenda is military planning, and Gia quickly volunteers to begin assembling an army. However, Takuto stops him, explaining that he doesn't want to invest heavily in the military just yet. Armies don't generate resources, they only use them up, and currently, Minegra lacks the resources to support one. On top of that, even if they did manage to form an army, they're still far too weak to win any real battles, making the effort meaningless for now. Gia objects, arguing that in their current state, they lack the means to defend Takuto if he were targeted. Besides, both Molter and Gia still have bounties on them as former leaders of the Dark Elf tribe, making them potential targets for hunters at any moment. front. Given the situation, Takuto agrees that ignoring defense would be unwise, but he still doesn't want to pour resources into building an entire army. Instead, he decides to create a hero. Atu supports the plan, saying it's a smart move. While a hero may be expensive to produce, it's much more manageable to support one individual than to sustain an entire military force. Molter and Gia are puzzled by Atu's mention of a hero, so they ask her to clarify. She explains that in Minagra, there are multiple heroes who serve the king, each incredibly strong with unique abilities, though their eccentric personalities can make them difficult to handle. Summoning a hero requires meeting certain conditions, but given their current progress, it shouldn't be long before they can call one forth. Additionally, summoning a hero won't attract much attention, allowing Minagra to stay concealed while gaining more power. That takes care of the immediate domestic issues for now. The well-being of Minagra's citizens is a top priority for Takuto after all. Their happiness directly fuels his mana supply. Meanwhile, in the Empire, the paladin Lonius is deep in prayer inside the cathedral when his partner paladin Verdal approaches to speak with him. Lonius asks him to keep his voice down, reminding him that it's a place of worship. Verdal, however, is just trying to strike up a friendly conversation, since they've both been assigned to the same investigation. It's nearly time for them to head out, so Lonius stands up and notices his wedding ring, which he's wearing as a good luck charm, a sign that he has a family waiting for him back home. Verdal asks about them, and Lonius replies that he has a wife named Marcia and a daughter named Mina. However, he adds that his personal life isn't relevant to their mission, and he doesn't intend to discuss it further. Lonius had heard that Verdal was rough around the edges and lacking in manners, and those rumors turned out to be true. But despite that, he doesn't seem like a bad person. In fact, his abilities are impressive enough to earn him respect as a paladin. When Verdal starts grumbling about being stuck with what he sees as a pointless mission, Lonius reminds him that they're actually investigating one of Saint Selena's revelations, so it's a task that deserves their full attention. Even so, Verdal finds it odd that such an underwhelming team was put together for something as important as a saint's revelation. He and Lonius are the only actual paladins assigned to the mission. The rest are just mercenaries brought in to make up the numbers. Things aren't exactly looking promising, especially with the mission taking them into the southern forest. Still, Verdal's main concern is finishing the job quickly so he can return home as soon as possible. Back in Minagra, construction is progressing smoothly, and the settlement is finally beginning to resemble a real civilization. The Dark Elves no longer seem disturbed by the presence of the flesh trees. Takuto is thrilled, as witnessing everything firsthand is an entirely different experience from what he was used to when playing the game. Emily gives Takuto a tour and points toward the neighborhood, where most of the houses are built among the treetops. She explains that because she's been prioritizing food production, she hasn't been able to devote much effort to the dwellings. Still, the flesh trees are developing well, meaning the food storage facility will likely be finished shortly. Meanwhile, Molter has been working on his magical research over at the Magic Institute he created, and most of the citizens who are talented in magic have joined in on his research. In addition, they also discovered a spring nearby, so they now have a secured water source. And at last, this building will serve as the public office where Minagra's administrative meetings will take place. Emily had hoped to make it a bit more elegant, but this was the best she could manage given the limited resources. Takuto is impressed by the initiative she's taking. She's doing a great job, and he's also happy to see the Dark Elves, who were near death when he first met them, now looking healthy and full of life. Emily is a little nervous since she can't tell what Takuto is thinking, so she asks if he is pleased with her work so far, and Takuto tells her she has done a great job. He says he is glad to have her as one of his citizens, and hearing such high praise from Takuto is the best thing Emily could have asked for, and she's so happy that she breaks down in tears. After pulling herself together, Emily takes Takuto to see the flesh tree farm, which has been developing well thanks to all the farming tools he supplied. Still, she's creeped out by the flesh trees and quickly changes the subject, saying she wants to show him a water source she discovered. She leads Takuto and Atu into the forest, but strangely, the surroundings look different than they did before. When they finally reach the spring, Emily is shocked to find that the water has turned pitch black. Molter and Gia arrive shortly after, having heard that Emily planned to build an aqueduct near the spring, but now that the water looks the way it does, they assume it's no longer usable. Just as everyone everyone begins to lose hope, Atu speaks up and assures them that the water is still completely safe. She kneels down and takes a sip herself. The others are stunned that she would take such a bold risk, but she then urges them to take a deep breath. When they do, they're surprised to find that the air somehow feels fresher and cleaner than usual. This is one of the advantages of the malevolent nation of Minogra. Its influence corrupts the surrounding land, turning it into cursed terrain. This cursed ground provides small enhancements to evil-aligned creatures while weakening those who are neutral or good. So even though the water, air, and soil may appear ominous and toxic, they pose no harm to the evil citizens of Minogra. There's only one small issue. Having a cursed forest makes them stand out. That kind of defeats the purpose of staying under the radar. It's manageable for now, as long as the cursed area stays limited. But as Minogra grows, it'll be easier for enemies to spot them. That's why Gia and Molter believe it's time to begin building the army Gia talked about earlier. Still, Atu assures them there's no need to stress, since one hero alone is strong enough to deal with any threats in the early stages. Molter and Gia still don't fully understand what a hero is actually capable of. Atu could go into a detailed explanation about stats, but she figures it'll be faster to simply show them firsthand. Tentacles sprout from Atu's back, and in an instant, she uses them to slash down every tree nearby. Molter and Gia are completely stunned by what they've just witnessed. Atu then explains that she's also a hero, and after spending some time in this world, her powers are finally starting to return, though they're still far from what they were at her peak. The key point is that heroes are immensely powerful and only become stronger over time, as long as they avoid major threats for some time. Takuto believes they'll be fine. However, he's slightly annoyed with Atu for unnecessarily destroying trees just to show off her power. Meanwhile, Molter and Gia remain amazed by Takuto's abilities and are excited to construct a palace worthy of his greatness. However, Takuto believes that would be an unnecessary use of resources, so he refuses, saying he doesn't need one. But everyone argue that a castle is essential. They'd feel ashamed as his subjects if he didn't have one, and since they're making such a fuss about it, Atu tells Takuto he might as well have one built to keep them happy. Takuto acknowledges that a palace would be impressive, and since he'd already dreamed of building a floating castle one day, now seems like the perfect time to start, especially since everything is going so well. However, what he doesn't realize is that the paladins are advancing toward the Dark Continent, and when they finally cross paths, a war is likely to break out. As they travel, Virgil compliments Lornius on successfully hiring so many mercenaries. Lornius responds that it wasn't an easy task, particularly because most of the local mercenaries are currently deployed in the north. Apparently, a group of barbarians suddenly showed up in the northern province and started attacking nearby villages. The Saint and her army were dispatched to handle the threat, but things up there remain dire. One of the mercenaries remarks that they're relieved they don't have to face the barbarians themselves. Another chimes in, saying it might be worth the risk since he's heard the pay is excellent. However, there are also whispers about a witch being spotted in the area, and none of them want to get involved with that. Virgil tells them there's no use discussing it anymore, since real or not, that northern witch won't be their problem. They're headed for the accursed lands in the south. The group quickly makes their way to a nearby inn to stay for the night. As they dine together, Lornius starts questioning the mercenary Bargo for more information about the witch he mentioned before. Bargo mentions that he only heard a rumor claiming a witch was behind all the chaos in the north. However, Lornius finds that idea ridiculous, arguing that there's no way one person could cause such destruction, especially with a saint already sent to handle the situation. Bargo admits it does seem unlikely and that he doesn't really believe it himself, but insists it's better to be cautious, since encountering a real witch would be extremely dangerous. Bargo finds it odd that the kingdom sent two holy knights so abruptly, particularly since they're headed to the accursed lands. He presses Virgil to reveal what exactly they're supposed to handle, because if it's anything like a witch, Bargo is quitting on the spot. Virgil didn't have any specifics about what awaited them in the forest, but he reassured Bargo that it couldn't be too serious. If he had to speculate, he'd say it was likely related to the recent influx of dark elves into the area. The kingdom probably just wanted them to ensure the elves weren't stirring up trouble. He's mistaken in thinking that that Lornius and Bargo completely trust him, as dark elves are widely regarded by the kingdom's people as deadly assassins and wielders of curses. Lornius is especially worried that if the dark elves are left unchecked, they could eventually become powerful enough to threaten the kingdom. Because of that, he wants to eliminate them. However, Verdal interrupts, reminding him that their mission is strictly for investigation. The moment things turn dangerous or violent, their orders are to retreat. Bargo feels relieved to see that Verdal is being reasonable, as he has no interest in taking part in a massacre. Lornius, on the other hand, can't understand why Verdal would pass up the chance to wipe out the Dark Elves. Verdal simply brings up Lornius' family, implying that he's not willing to throw himself into a deadly fight without a good reason, even if Lornius doesn't mind risking his life. The other mercenaries have families they hope to return to. That's why, unless it's absolutely necessary, Verdal refuses to endanger their lives. Lornius still isn't convinced the elves should be spared, but his desire to reunite with his family wins out. In the end, he chooses to follow orders. Meanwhile, Takuto gathers all his citizens in one place, insisting they witness something important. They look confused as he stands silently beside a heap of meat tree fruit, until he lifts his hand and channels mana into them. Everyone watches with anticipation, curious to see what will happen next. To their astonishment, the pile of fruit suddenly transforms into a scout bug right before their eyes. The group is left in awe. Takuto had essentially brought a new life form into existence with just a simple move. Atu then declares that this is only a glimpse of Takuto's true capabilities and urges everyone to continue dedicating themselves to him. A little while later, Takuto returns to his throne, feeling relieved that no one questioned him too much about how the scout bug was created, mainly because he doesn't really understand it himself. He and Atu are just following the steps from the game to make it happen, but seeing it unfold in real life, it's hard to wrap his head around the idea that just infusing a pile of fruit with mana could actually bring something to life. With the ability to safely produce soldiers now confirmed, Atu declares it's time for the next stage of their plan, forging a hero. The process will be slow, as Takuto must gather enough mana for the ritual, but once complete, their power will be nearly limitless. Atu can barely contain her excitement and eagerly asks Takuto which hero he'll summon first. Without hesitation, he chooses Isla, the queen of insects, because she offers the best advantages early on. Isla's presence alone strengthens all insect-type soldiers in the forest, turning even scout bugs into formidable fighters. But her true value lies in her versatility. She can spawn larva soldiers for both combat and construction, drastically accelerating Minagra's growth. Atu commends Takuto for his brilliant tactical choice. Beyond Isla's practical advantages, she's also the most stable among the available heroes. One is a power-hungry warmonger, and the other is a pyromaniac bent on global annihilation, neither of which Takuto wants to handle at this stage. Still, Takuto knows he'll have to summon those other two eventually. Their power is simply too great to ignore. He just hopes they won't stir up too much chaos when the time comes. After all, he'd much rather enjoy a quiet life in this world. Meanwhile, the Holy Knights encounter an enraged hill giant, and it's clear that handling the situation won't be simple. Lornius immediately orders the mercenaries to prepare for combat, but before the battle can start, Verdal steps forward and instructs everyone to hold back, insisting he'll take care of it alone. Lornius begins to protest, but Verdal assures him that it will be faster this way and they can't afford to waste any more time. Verdal approaches the giant and begins to recite an incantation. Lornius then informs the mercenaries that Verdal is using the secret art of qualia, a technique that channels divine energy into one's attacks through prayer. The giant tries to smash Verdal with its club, but Verdal effortlessly cuts the weapon in two. The strength granted by divine arts might have your physical abilities enhanced, but for elite holy knights like Verdal, it's comparable to the power of a lesser dragon. In other words, the giant never stood a chance. After Verdal has slain the giant, Lornius begins praising him for his immense power and says that with Verdal and their team, they can definitely complete their mission without any problem. However, doesn't look pleased and tells him that they can't be sure of anything yet. Back with Takuto, he is happily devouring a burger while Atu watches with mild concern. Ever since they arrived, he's been living off fast food, and though she has no intention of stopping him, she does suggest he should eat something healthier. But Takuto mentions that when he was hospitalized, he spent his last days eating healthier meals. Now, he just wants to enjoy delicious food now that he has the chance. Just then, he remembers that he has something important he wanted to discuss. Takuto asks Atu if she can summon Gia and Molter for a meeting after this. Atu agrees to do so, but she's curious as to what this meeting is about. So Takuto explains that thanks to the additional scout bug he got, he can now see more of the forest, so he wants to ask Gia and Molter for advice on how they should handle it. Atu asks Takuto if he's talking about the village near the forest, and he confirms it. His biggest concern is that, given how close it is, it's only a matter of time before they discover Minagra's existence. Thankfully, the village doesn't seem to be affiliated with the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, which likely makes them neutral, meaning there's a chance for peaceful negotiations. But if anyone else were to appear, it would spell trouble, since traveling this far would almost certainly mean they're here on a specific mission. Takuto reassures Atu that she doesn't need to stress after all. There's no sign anyone has discovered them yet. Atu teases him, saying that kind of talk always invites trouble, and Takuto laughs along. But his laughter dies abruptly when he notices that, in fact, people have appeared and worse. They seem to be a squad of armed soldiers. Takuto wants to avoid standing out too much, so he asks Atu to go deal with the soldiers. He also asks her to try being peaceful first, but if that doesn't work, then she's free to use as much violence as necessary. Just outside the forest, the knights prepare to make their way in, but before they can proceed, Verdal senses something unusual beyond the trees and quickly tells everyone to stop. Moments later, Atu steps out wearing a cloak, and both Verdal and Lornius are stunned. They never expected to encounter a young girl living deep within the Forbidden Woods. Verdal asks her to state who she is, and Atu claims to be a simple dark elf dwelling in the forest with her kin. Lornius, still harboring resentment toward dark elves, is about to say something hostile, but Verdal stops him and shifts the conversation. He explains to Atu that they're only here to explore the forest, and then asks if she would be willing to let them enter. Atu courteously refuses their request, explaining that the dark elves prefer not to have their new settlement disturbed without cause. Lornius takes offense, angered that a mere dark elf would reject a demand from holy servants of God. However, before he can respond further, Verdal snaps at him to keep his mouth shut before he makes things worse. Verdal tries to persuade Atu to grant them access by mentioning the divine revelation their saint received about a looming calamity hidden within the forest. Lornius begins to panic, shocked that Verdal would openly share such a classified national secret with a complete stranger. Verdal tells Lornius to stay quiet again, but Lornius protests, saying that sharing a divine revelation without authorization violates the Holy Order's laws. He threatens to report Verdal as soon as they return to Qualia, but Verdal tells him he can do whatever he wants. Then, turning back to Atu, he asks once more if she'll allow them inside. Even so, Atu still refuses their request, telling Verdal there's no need to investigate the forest since there's nothing dangerous or sinister within it. Verdal can tell she's lying, but he decides not to press the issue any further. Instead, he turns to the group and announces that they're heading back. Verdal isn't foolish. He can sense that Atu is on a completely different level. He also understands that the smartest move right now is to pull back and regroup before taking any further action. However, Lornius doesn't understand this. Instead, he lashes out, accusing Verdal of deserting the mission and declaring that he's removing him from command. Lornius declares that they're heading into the forest to investigate and commands the mercenaries to follow him. However, since Lornius was the one who hired them, they're bound to obey his orders instead. Seizing the opportunity, Lornius snaps at the men to capture Atu immediately for defying him earlier. The mercenaries begin to surround her. Atu feels disheartened that all her efforts to resolve things peacefully were in vain. She really tried, but in the end, it didn't matter. A short time later, Lornius regains consciousness on the floor, all covered in blood. He sees Atu stabbing all the mercenaries, while Verdal stands guard over him, announcing that they've located the witch. Verdal anxiously tells Bargo to make sure he gets one of the messengers back home to inform them about what just happened here. But Bargo says that's not going to be possible because Atu just wiped out all their messengers with that single attack. Meanwhile, Atu is ever confident. She tells them not to get scared now. After all, she's the exact kind of monster they've been searching for. The soldiers' corpses drop to the ground, and Lornius is petrified with fear. However, Verdal still stands strong. He urges them not to lose lose their cool because it's either they get killed right now or fight till the very end. He orders everyone to take their combat positions and ready their weapons, but Atu doesn't look the slightest bit intimidated by this. She honestly finds it kind of amusing. They think they'll be able to defeat her. They send an entire fleet of arrow shots at her, but she effortlessly blocks every single one with her tentacles, all while smiling. Verdal and Lonius can't believe their eyes. Everything was going so well until she came along. Now Atu plans on finishing them off once and for all, but before she does, she lets them know that what's about to happen is all their fault for trying to pry where they shouldn't have. At this point, Lonius is curious about what a witch like Atu is and what she's capable of, so he asks Verdal to explain. Verdal admits he was asked to keep that information confidential by the higher-ups, but he figures he's about to die anyway, so it wouldn't even matter. It turns out that when a saint receives a revelation and the upper ranks confirm it, that monster is then classified as a witch. He has strong reason to believe the woman standing before them is that very same being. Lonius hears his explanation and understands that they're both screwed. Atu asks them if they're done with all the chit-chat. She's about to finish them off, but Verdal and the others aren't going down without a fight. He tells the mercenaries to fall back. He and Lonius are going to take care of this. They both charge forward with their swords in hand and make contact with Atu's tentacles. Atu smirks, saying they're a lot slower and weaker than she expected. But things take an unexpected turn as they both manage to slice through her tentacles. Atu herself can't believe her eyes. After Lonius and Verdal create some distance, they conclude that their game plan is going to be, first of all, cutting down her disgusting tentacles. But Atu doesn't panic. Rather, she weirdly starts to pet the tentacle that was cut off. Verdal interrupts that with a forehand strike that cuts yet another one of her tentacles off. Lonius follows up and cuts one off as well, which makes Atu finally start to sweat. Atu only has 2 tentacles left, so she uses them to take 2 of their paladins hostage. She admits that she might have underestimated them a bit. They've now proven to be quite stronger than she thought. She's conversant with how much humans care for each other, so she plans on using those paladins as meat shields, fully knowing Verdal and Lonius won't attack. Verdal urges Lonius to keep his cool. He tells Lonius to think about the bigger picture. If they sacrifice these 2 paladins and defeat Atu, their victory would mean putting an end to this once and for all. They both charge in simultaneously at Atu to deliver the final blow. Atu is shocked to see them willing to attack, knowing it would mean killing 2 of their soldiers. They both slice through the soldiers and are about to land a decisive strike. But that's when Atu decides to show her true colors. In the next moment, Lonius opens his eyes and finds himself still alive on the floor. But as for Verdal, let's just say he won't be making it back home. His body drops down to the floor and blood leaks out. At this point, Lonius doesn't understand what's going on because they'd already cut off all her tentacles, but Atu informs him that she can regenerate them as much as she wants. This means she was toying with him right from the start. Lonius has no more tricks up his sleeves, so he just tells the other paladins to get out of there as quickly as they can. At least one person has to make it back alive to warn their kingdom about this. Hearing that order, the paladins make a break for it. As a last-ditch effort, Lonius tries a sneak attack on Atu with his sword, but she easily blocks it by drawing a sword of her own. Lonius shudders in shock as he wonders how she is able to use the holy sword of arts. Atu swings the sword around playfully while she tells him that she absorbed both the sword and its techniques from Verdal. All the diligent effort he put in and techniques he honed all became hers at the moment she killed him. Atu isn't surprised that Verdal was such a high-ranking paladin. He was concerned for all of their safety right until his final moment. But it's so sad that he ended up being killed because Lonius couldn't keep his mouth shut. They both go back and forth in battle until Atu asks if he still wants to see his wife and daughter again. Lonius is stunned. How could she know about his family? Just then, Lonius comes to the realization that Atu also gained Verdal's feelings and memories after killing him, and she would only get stronger with the more people she kills. Still, Lonius feels somewhat noble because while he's here holding her off, the other mercenaries can escape back to the kingdom. But things take another dark turn as he hears one of the mercenaries scream in pain. Atu tells him that should be the Dark Elves. She brought them there beforehand and ordered them not to let a single man escape. Atu tells Lonius not to be so surprised because, after all, she never told him she was alone. Lonius hears that and screams to the top of his lungs in shock. Then, as a last-ditch effort, he tries to land a quick attack on her, but as expected, she counters easily. The sun sets a few moments later. Atu uses her tentacles to hang Lonius upside down, after which she tells him that things only ended up this way because he was too stubborn to listen to Vertil's orders. If only he had listened to Vertil, she assumes he would have returned back home safe to his family. He would have been able to enjoy the peaceful happiness of an ordinary life. Now, she tells him what's going to happen to him with the future he chose. She's going to kill him and then hunt his family down and kill them. Atu says she's going to torment them until they beg for death. Only then will she kill them. After that, she'll go to every village and town they all stopped at on their way here and kill everyone living person there. There won't really be much of a point in doing that, but she might as well just kill them anyway. Then, when they ask her why she's doing this, she'll tell them that it was all because of his foolish actions. The thought of this makes Lonius start to tremble with fear. He then begs her to spare his life, but she's not really in a forgiving mood, so she rips him to pieces while he screams in agony. After it's done, the only thing that remains is Lonius's ring, and it sits in the wide pool of his own blood. Just then, Gia come to report, saying they finished off all the mercenaries just like she asked. Atu is pleased to hear that, and she's sure King Takuto would be as well. Atu tells them that she's heading back to base. She gives them the responsibility of disposing of the corpses, but before she leaves, Gia, looking somewhat concerned, asks if she really intends to do all the things she told Lonius before killing him. But Atu tells them she's definitely not going to do all that. She considers herself a pacifist, and she was just saying all that stuff to mess with him. Atu realizes that she's running late, so she hurries back to meet up with Takuto. Gia sees that she's in quite a hurry, so he asks her if there's anything bothering her. Atu replies that she has something very important she needs to tell Takuto right away. Sometime later, Atu meets up with Takuto and informs him about the existence of witches in this world. Takuto hears that and is quite surprised because witches didn't exist in the Eternal Nations game. That said, Atu concludes that this world definitely isn't the world of the game. Takuto kind of already saw this coming, but he now has to accept the fact that they have come to another world entirely. The game's mechanics have been applicable to an extent, but Atu believes they should assume this world functions quite differently from what they're used to. She tells Takuto that this might actually be a good thing. She's referring to her special ability. In the game, Atu had a set chance to steal the abilities of anyone she killed. Now, she's even able to absorb fragments of their memories. She believes this could become a powerful weapon in their arsenal. Takuto agrees, saying it's all thanks to that ability of hers that they were able to learn about the situation in Qualia without having to send anyone to investigate. It's fortunate for them that Qualia doesn't have any forces to spare thanks to the disaster that happened in the northern province. With that, they both conclude that they can take things easy for a while, but they still can't get too comfortable because they assume that Qualia is likely to take some kind of action after the investigation squad was wiped out. Takuto reminds Atu that Qualia doesn't have any information of Minagra, so even if they do anything, they would have to do so with caution. What concerns Takuto more is what caused the disaster in the first place. According to Atu's stolen memories, the northern disturbance was caused by a witch, but unfortunately, they don't have any other information about that witch, so Takuto can't draw any other conclusions. The only thing they know is that the witch caused damage on par with armies to the cities of the northern province, and Atu says that her name is Irakino. The scene then shifts to where we see Irakino, a little girl dressed in an all-red outfit. She calls out to her zombie minions and tells them their next stop is the next city. Meanwhile, Takuto and Atu are still brainstorming. The recent disturbance in the north suggests that a monster capable of causing army-level destruction appeared in a very short time. Takuto considers the possibility of them coming into this world just like he and Atu did. Either way, it's obvious they have someone that's on the same strength level as the hero unit. Takuto sighs, realizing the situation they're in isn't looking good. Atu asks Takuto whether he wants to reach out to them, but Takuto doesn't think that would be a good idea. There's no way they would get along. Atu expresses her frustration, saying they always have to keep dealing with one problem after another. Still, now they know the witch has the same combat strength of a hero unit. The best thing for them to do right now is create a new hero. Takuto was initially thinking of creating the hero named Ayla, but given the circumstances they're in, he needs to reconsider and focus on one with more combat potential. Atu is delighted to hear that. She's willing to help in any way she can. Takuto Takudo also mentions that he has been thinking about altering their policies a little. He's thinking about forging an alliance. He thinks it would be best if they have another nation on their side, since they're clearly enemy of Qualia and the witch, whom they don't really have that much information about. Atu gets his point, but doesn't think that would even be possible because both of them are evil aligned. But Takudo is confident it would be possible with a neutral aligned nation, especially if he provides some form of value to them. The neutral aligned nation he's referring to is the nation that lies in the east. He plans on investigating that nation while they strengthen their forces. He needs to find out if they'd be willing to cooperate or not. Now that's out of the way, Atu walks away for a few moments, but turns back to him and asks whether she made him upset after she went a little too far when dealing with the paladins. Takudo has a bright smile while he tells her not to worry about it. He'd never get offended by anything she does. All he wants is for her to keep supporting him. Atu lights up with joy as she hears that. She promises to support Takudo to the very end and with every fiber of her being. After a long week of building by the Dark Elves, Takudo's new palace is finally complete. Both Takudo and Atu are thrilled with how beautiful it looks. When they step inside, Atu looks around, loving the decorations. Even though they still have many problems ahead, she believes this is where their real story begins. Takudo agrees and says that when they have some free time, they should think about making the palace even bigger. Excited Atu says Takudo's kingdom will be one served by the greatest heroes in the land. Her excitement quickly fades when she realizes she forgot to assign anyone to take care of Takudo. She starts calling herself a terrible servant, but Takudo tells her she's being too hard on herself. Atu asks if he has any special requests for a servant. After thinking for a moment, he nervously says he wants someone who's easy to talk to. Because of his poor social skills, Takudo hasn't been able to speak much with the Dark Elves, and he's been feeling lonely. Atu hears this and tells Takudo not to worry. She has an idea, but Takudo feels uneasy, since nothing good usually happens when Atu gets so excited. A few minutes later, Molter, Gia, and Emily arrive at the throne room, speaking for him. Atu tells Molter to gather all the little girls in the area because King Takudo wants them. Both Takudo and Molter freeze in shock at how that sounds. Atu's real plan is for the little girls to spend time with Takudo so he can practice his communication skill with people. Molter anxiously asks why she would give such an order. Atu replies that it's because King Takudo likes little girls. The Dark Elves are speechless, hoping it's not what they're thinking. Takudo feels embarrassed and regrets letting Atu handle this. A bit later, everyone calmed down when Atu explains that King Takudo just needs a child nearby to help with his daily needs. They feel relieved, but they still don't understand why it has to be a little girl when a little boy could do the job as well. This time, Takudo speaks for himself. He says he wants little girls for the sake of future leadership. In this land, he's noticed men always get the chances, so he wants women to have an opportunity to shine. The elves praise him for his deep thinking. Takudo breathes a sigh of relief. The thing about men and women was just an excuse. He's just glad they believed it. He doesn't want them to know the real reason is that he's awkward and antisocial. With the matter settled, Atu tells the elves to bring their finest young girls to serve King Takudo. Takudo starts feeling excited, thinking this might help him overcome his shyness. But then, things take an unexpected turn when all the elf girls start crying as soon as they arrive. Atu sees that Takudo is getting irritated by the constant crying, so she immediately calls Molter and scolds him for how weak the children of his land are. All Molter can do is apologize. Then, Gia turns to him and asks if he brought the twins to King Takudo. Molter quickly says he didn't because bringing those two before the king would be disrespectful. Atu overhears this and is kind of curious, so she asks what they're talking about. Molter explains that in their town, there's a pair of twin girls with no family. They are indeed wise, but he feels they wouldn't be suitable to serve as the king's attendants. Atu is puzzled. Wise girls like that sound perfect for King Takudo's attendants. Regardless, she orders them to bring the twins so they can decide for themselves whether to use them or not. Molter is just about to go summon the girls, but Gia says he was already one step ahead. He says he already called them, thinking the king might want to meet them in person. With that, Atu tells him to have the twins brought in right away. Soon after, two teenage elf girls enter and introduce themselves as Maria and Karia. Takudo nervously greets them, while Atu stares at them coldly and quickly senses they've had a grim past. She notices sores on Karia's skin and asks how she got them. Karia explains explains they came from a disease. King Takudo offers his sympathy, but Kariya tells him not to pity her, saying it's what she deserves. Elder Molter assumes the king would want more details, so he explains. The sores were caused by a plague, though Kariya has fully recovered. The scars remain. As for Maria, she also went through deeply traumatic experiences. When Atu asks what happened, Maria's eyes turn cold, and she says she ate her own mother. Atu is shocked and quickly looks to Molter for an explanation. He nervously explains that their mother was a woman the entire clan was proud of, and the choice was extremely difficult. Takudo immediately understands. After being driven from their homes, the Dark Elves had to travel far and wide with no equipment or supplies. Along the way, they faced many hardships, including starvation. With no other choice, their mother offered herself as a sacrifice, and they had to eat her to survive. Atu is impressed that the two girls are standing here without fear despite their past. Then Maria walks up to Takudo and casually begins talking to him. Takudo asks if she would be willing to take care of him, and she agrees. From that moment, Takudo declares her a candidate for the leadership of their great Minagra. Atu is shocked to see Takudo having a normal conversation with Maria without being weird or awkward. As for Kariya, Takudo asks if she's willing to take the job as well. She nervously says that she has a duty to stay with her big sister, so if Maria is here, she'll do her best to work alongside her. That's good enough for Takudo, so he agrees to make them both his attendants. Hearing this, Atu tells them it's their duty to care for King Takudo, no matter the circumstances. About an hour after the girls leave, Molter kneels before Takudo and says there's something important he must know. He explains that ever since the girls lost their mother, neither of them has cried, not even once. Takudo shudders in shock. Molter says their hearts have been closed off since then, and he begs Takudo to watch over them with tolerance and mercy. Later that day, the girls prove to be much clumsier than expected, spilling water on Takudo for the third time that day. Atu walks in, clearly disappointed in their clumsiness. Setting that aside, she tells them a meeting is about to be held. She wants Maria and Kariya to attend and warns them not to cause any trouble. In the meeting room, Emily gives her report on the ongoing construction projects. She begins by saying that now the king's palace is finished, they have plenty of labor to spare. Their supply of lumber is steady, and they have many other resources as well. With all that considered, she believes they can begin building a new facility. Atu agrees and orders her to start constructing a clinic. This was actually Takudo's idea, as it would help guarantee the health and safety of their citizens. As instructed, Emily says she'll begin construction immediately. Next on the agenda is the state of resources. Atu asks who's in charge, and Emily stands up again, saying she's responsible for that too. Atu rolls her eyes, realizing they really need more staff. Still, Emily reports that their food and material supplies are stable. Thanks to King Takudo, they can now provide daily necessities they can't produce themselves. However, since this process uses mana, their balance between input and output still needs improvement. Atu says that using mana for emergency production is convenient, so they'll keep doing it since it's a necessary expense, but they'll need to focus on building and researching ways to increase mana production. She wishes Emily good luck managing that as well. Since mana is now the topic, Atu moves on to research progress. Molter speaks up, saying he and his team have finished their research on military magic. He's the only one in his clan who can use it right now, but with training, he's confident his subordinates will learn it too. He also believes that casting powerful magic using the ruin mana from the palace will be important for their future. However, given the Takudo's policies, he doubts it will be used very often. Atu agrees, saying that while military magic is useful in combat, it has no use in domestic matters. For their research, she wants to proceed as planned and move on to the 6 major elements in the magic tree. There's no reason to research anything else at this stage. Takudo agrees with her. While this approach might make them unbalanced in magic, he believes that specializing in one field will be best for them. Lastly, the head of the military gives their report. Sojiya stands up. He explains that they've added 5 new long-legged bugs to their forces. These bugs were mainly out surveying the uncharted lands around the accursed lands. However, unlike inside the accursed lands, the land beyond the forest is mostly plains. Since they're focusing on staying hidden, they can't carry out any bold investigations right now. Atu hears this and mentions that King Takudo has already received a detailed report on their surroundings. Given the need for stealth, she orders Jia to assign all the long-legged bugs to patrol their borders. soldiers. She wants them all focused on that, assuring him that she can handle their defense for now. Her encounter with the paladins is proof of that, and Gia can confirm it. Changing the subject, Atu announces that they've officially decided to produce a new hero. Takudo then says he has chosen to summon Ayla, the queen of the bugs. Everyone shudders at the news. Atu asks the resource team if they have the materials needed to summon Ayla. Molter steps forward to report personally they've already gathered enough lumber and rations and have transported them to the ritual site. Takudo realizes that means all they still need is mana. With that, today's agenda is finished. Since Takudo has no other matters to discuss, the meeting is adjourned. As they leave the meeting room, Maria slips and drops all the meeting documents. Karia tries to help but accidentally tears one of them. They both look at Takudo to apologize, but he doesn't get angry. He simply says it's fine. A moment later, Maria walks up to him and asks why he hasn't killed anyone even though he's supposed to be an evil king. Karia joins in, asking why an evil king like him would show them mercy. Maria even sounds upset that he's being so kind. Takudo sees they've misunderstood, so he decides to explain. He begins by saying that a good person can only do what's right. They can't kill or hurt others. As for a bad person, the girls assume it means someone who's always inclined to do bad things. But Takudo tells them that's not true. A real bad person simply does whatever they want. They are free to do both bad and good. They can believe in what they think is right and ignore everyone else's opinions. Because of that, Takudo believes it's perfectly fine for him to be kind to the two girls. Then it hits him. Their clumsiness was intentional. They were trying to make him angry enough to kill them. Takudo finds it heartbreaking that they can't forgive themselves for surviving at the cost of their mother's life, and now seek death as a form of salvation. Takudo steps down from his throne and sits closer to them. He reminds the girls that they're only alive today because their mother did what she had to do to keep them safe. The girls admit they know that, but they say that living is still torture for them. Their mother's last words were for them to live on. Takudo tells them again that they are here because their mother's love overcame fate itself. He pats their heads and says they should live however they please so that her love will be rewarded. Hearing this, the girls break down in tears and hug him tightly from both sides. An hour later, Atu walks in and is startled to see the twins asleep in the same chair as Takudo. They're clearly closer now than before. Setting that aside, she asks Takudo to come to the meeting room so she can give her report. Her report is about a city in Forngon, a nation made up mostly of humans and beastmen. The city is called Dragonton. The nation runs on a parliamentary system led by shamans known as the staff holders. Takudo notes that such a multiracial nation would mix many cultures and ideologies, making diplomacy promising. Still, he wonders why they'd build a city here. It would cost a lot to maintain trade and distribute goods. So, Atu reports that there's a dragon vein mine within the city. A mine like that can produce mana, so she believes they should secure it as soon as possible. However, Dragonton appears to be on high alert. They only observed from a distance, but saw it was under attack by barbarians such as ogres and goblins. The defenders seemed to be struggling and had no reinforcements coming. If the city is under siege, Atu says there's a high chance refugees will flee. Welcoming them could greatly boost Minegra's population. With that in mind, they decide to send diplomats to the city of Forngon. The next day, Atu and some dark elves arrive at the city of Forgon, but as soon as they get there, they run into a party of beast folk led by a female beast warrior named Tonokapali. Tonokapali starts sweating as she stares down Atu because she can sense a heavy aura of darkness surrounding her. Moments later, the situation only grows worse when her soldiers begin to tremble in fear. Tonokapali quickly realizes this is because of their natural beastman instincts. Atu tells the dark elves to stand back while she handles the beast folk herself. They step aside just as she ordered, which only makes Tonokapali sweat more. Just from looking at Atu, she can already tell this isn't someone they could ever hope to defeat. Worse, if the standoff continues, she's certain her soldiers will panic and act recklessly. Atu extends her tentacles, ready to finish the beast folk right there. But just then, she's interrupted by a cute little boy named Pepe, smiling innocently. Pepe looks up at her and simply asks for her name. The question catches Atu completely off guard, causing her to retract her tentacles. Tonokapali, however, is instantly overcome with anger and fear, convinced that Atu will feel insulted and kill them all. But to her surprise, the situation takes an unexpected turn when they are soon seen traveling peacefully back to Minegra together. Atu admits she's surprised that the beast folk want an audience with King Takudo, since her people had only just sent a delegation to Dragonton themselves. When Tonokapali hears this, she realizes that's exactly why they crossed paths on the road. Pepe then launches into non-stop chatter, but he talks so fast that Atu can't understand a single word. Tonokapali notices this and quickly apologizes on Pepe's behalf, bluntly calling him an idiot. Setting that aside, Atu asks if she's really certain about leaving her soldiers behind. Tonokapali nods and explains that the miasma here is too harsh for them to endure, so she had them wait outside. Her expression then grows serious. They are about to meet the great King Takudo, the one capable of commanding someone as strong as Atu. She can only wonder what kind of man truly awaits them. Soon after, they arrive at the palace, where Atu introduces Tonokapali and Pepe to King Takudo. Tonokapali freezes, her nerves tightening even more. No matter how hard she tries, she can't get a proper read on him. It's almost as if he embodies darkness itself. She remembers how she once allowed a terrifying creature to settle in their territory, never imagining that decision would one day come back to haunt her like this. A flashback takes us to the city of Foregone, where Pepe wields his magic staff and strikes down a giant goblin in a single blow. His comrades are stunned, cheering and praising him as the almighty shaman. The attention goes straight to Pepe's head, and he carelessly drops his guard. That's when the supposedly defeated goblin suddenly stirs, rising to deliver a crushing blow. At the very last moment, Tonokapali intervenes, summoning enchanted glass tendrils that bind the creature tightly. With the monster restrained, the other soldiers need only move in to finish it off. With the monster slain, the soldiers turn back and see Tonokapali scolding Pepe for being so careless, warning him that leaving his guard down could have cost him his life. Pepe tries to defend himself, calling her granny, but Tonokapali instantly bonks him on the head. She yells at him, saying she's told him countless times to stop calling her granny, especially since she's still a healthy 240 years old. Putting that aside, she continues to lecture Pepe, reminding him that he's the only young staff holder among them, so he should stop fooling around and start acting more like a leader. But despite her harsh words, Pepe just smiles casually and says he'll try his best. Seeing his nonchalant attitude makes Tonokapali worry even more, wondering if he'll be able to survive for long, especially since they're about to head into the accursed lands. Pepe has no idea what she means by that, so Tonokapali explains that signs of the apocalypse have been emerging from there, which is why they were ordered to investigate. She warns him that if the barbarian attacks continue, it won't take long before they're all dead. She adds that it's even worse for a detached city like Dragonton, since they can't send the army there. Although there is no proof that the source of the attacks lies within the accursed lands, their mission is to confirm it quickly. Looking back, Tonokapali deeply regrets her decision, wishing she had ignored the elders and left Pepe behind. Then she wouldn't have dragged him into such a dangerous place. Yet, right after that heavy thought, Pepe suddenly stretches out his hand to King Takudo and asks him to be his friend. Tonokapali nearly has a heart attack at the sight, quickly covering his mouth and begging King Takudo to forgive such disrespect. Takudo pauses for a moment, remembering how in his old life he was always sad and lonely, and realizes that maybe it wouldn't hurt to make a friend. With that, he accepts Pepe's request, saying he hopes they can get along. Tonokapali is completely stunned, while Pepe jumps in joy, celebrating. At the same time, Atu nearly bursts with excitement, congratulating Takudo on making his very first friend. Hearing this, the dark elves who are present begin applauding him for such a big milestone. Tonokapali just stands there, watching in disbelief at everything that's happening before her eyes. Later that day, Takudo holds a party to welcome Pepe's group. Korea hands Tonokapali a drink, and after one sip, she's amazed by how delicious it is. Atu smiles, saying she expected that reaction since their nation prides itself on having the tastiest drinks in the world. Tonokapali is stunned. Not only is the drink incredibly sweet, but she's also never seen such fine glassware before. Meanwhile, Pepe gets overly excited after drinking the apple juice. He even walks up to Molter and proudly shows off his plant powers. Watching this, Takudo instantly notices that Pepe's social skills are impressive. He's already blending in with everyone, something Takudo knows he could never do himself. At the same time, Takudo realizes this is the first real friend he's ever had, leaving him unsure of how to act. Thinking it over, he decides it might be best to show a little friendliness to prove there are no hostile intentions. So, Takudo calls out to Pepe and asks if he wants to play a game, the whole room stares at him in silence, which makes Takudo feel awkward. But then Pepe happily agrees, saying he'd love to play. With that, the two spend the afternoon enjoying various games together. Takudo is genuinely having fun, realizing this is the first time in ages he's played with a friend. After another round, Pepe suggests that Takudo should sell the game box to people in their land, since they'd surely love it. Tonokapali panics and tells Pepe to shut up, warning him not to say things like that. To her shock, Takudo actually agrees. He figures that they were already planning to open trade with outsiders, so Pepe's idea works out perfectly. Still, there are details he needs to confirm before making final decisions. With the games over, he knows it's time to focus back on national diplomacy. About an hour later, Pepe leans back in his chair after stuffing himself with food, but Tonokapali bonks him on the head, scolding him for getting too comfortable. At that moment, Atu calls out to Tonokapali and finally asks why she came to their lands. Tonokapali is surprised it took her this long to ask, but she explains that their nation has been repeatedly attacked by barbarians. This is unusual since barbarians normally avoid big cities, yet now they're arriving in massive hordes. That's why they came here to investigate further. Hearing this, Takudo instantly understands the situation. It's clear they're short on military strength and have come to ask for help. Tonokapali is shaken by how quickly he figured it out, and she starts to worry that negotiations will fail if he knows their weakness. She immediately replies, saying that their defenses are strong enough to drive the barbarians away, but the truth is that they prefer to have much greater defensive power on their side just to be safe. Atu understands her point and agrees that this is far too serious of a matter to ignore. Tonokapali then adds that two of their strongest warriors, the staff holders, have already been sent out to investigate the situation, and by telling them this, she hopes they will see it as a sign of confidence in their strength. Hearing that, the others can understand her reasoning, so they don't argue against it. But just then, Pepe suddenly speaks up, saying that the real reason they were sent to investigate is because their country will collapse if they don't find a way to deal with the threat. Tonokapali freezes in shock as Pepe has unintentionally exposed their nation's greatest weakness. After that, the atmosphere turns tense and awkward, so Atu quickly speaks up to show her sympathy for the difficult situation their country is in. Atu assures Tonokapali that they have no intention of causing harm to her people. Atu can tell that Tonokapali still suspects beings like them must be plotting something, but she explains that the people of Minagra always turn their interests inward, and that peace is their chosen path. As for the barbarians, Atu reminds her that if Dragonton falls, Minagra will immediately become the next target, which makes this a matter that concerns them just as much. Hearing that, Tonokapali looks at them carefully and asks if this means they are truly willing to help. Atu turns to Takudo and asks for his decision. Takudo simply says that friends should help each other, so he is willing to lend his aid. Tonokapali hears this and is relieved. Tonokapali then asks what they want in return, explaining that since Pepe exposed their weakness, they now have every right to take advantage of it. At that moment, Atu declares that they will take control of the Dragon Vein mine. Tonokapali lets out a heavy sigh upon hearing this, but she knows there is nothing she can do. However, Atu adds that they are willing to share joint control of the mine, since they do not currently need a vast supply of mana. What she does insist on, though, is the right to decide which elements the mine's energy will be converted into. Tonokapali explains that converting the pure mana of the Dragon Vein into specific elements is impossible right now, since it is a technology that would take them more than 10 years to develop. Putting that aside, she turns to both Takudo and Atu and makes it clear that no matter how foolish Pepe may act, he is still the future of their nation. Eventually, he will lead Forgone as a representative of the staff holders. On top of that, Pepe is the best judge of character in their kingdom. Even so, she turns to Pepe directly and tells him that the final decision is his to make, since as a staff holder, he has the right to decide. With that, Pepe smiles and says he agrees. Later that day, they hold another meeting to reaffirm and discuss the decisions made during their latest negotiations. Emily begins with her report, saying they've agreed to export provisions and toys to Forgone, and in exchange, they'll import daily necessities and metal goods. Molter admits it's a huge relief since they've been relying too much on King Takudo for those. Everyone also acknowledges that gaining access to the Dragon Vein mine was their biggest victory, and Pepe's slip-up really worked in their favor. Still, they agree they need to decide on their policy regarding future relations with Forngon. At that point, Carrier raises her hand and asks what kind of place Forngon even is. Everyone is stunned she doesn't know. Molter then speaks, saying it's very important to learn about the people of Forngon, their values, and their customs. Takuto immediately realizes this is a blind spot for him because none of those details were ever shown in the game he came from. Hearing that, Atu suggests they'll first need to investigate Forngon's capital, Crescent Moon, but since it's far away, it may take a long time. For now, they feel they should prioritize Dragonton since it needs help right away. Molter then points out they'll need a proper reason to directly enter another nation. That's when Takuto suggests sending a few people ahead to pay their respects before sending a formal delegation. Molter volunteers himself, but Takuto rejects the idea, saying Molter is far too important for such a job. Molter then suggests sending Carrier and Maria, thinking it would give them good experience, but Takuto disagrees again, saying it's too dangerous for them. They argue back and forth until Atu stands up and says she'll just go instead, since Takuto worries too much about others getting kidnapped, but Molter refuses, saying as the king's second in command, she can't possibly go. That's when Carrier and Maria speak up, insisting they want to go even if there's risk involved. At first Takuto refuses, but after the twins hit him with their puppy dog eyes, he caves in and reluctantly agrees. Still, Emily questions whether it's wise to send the twins alone, but Takuto reassures her, saying not to worry because he already has plans for their bodyguards. After the meeting, Atu sulks in front of Takuto, jealous that he gave in so easily to the twins' puppy dog eyes. Takuto tries to explain, saying it's not what she thinks, but she doesn't buy it. Then, Maria and Carrier walk up and encourage him to tell Atu what's really in his heart. So Takuto takes her hand and tells her how much he needs her, and that without her, he never would have come this far. The confession makes Atu blush, and she even starts imagining their wedding and future life together in her head. She drops to her knees, overcome with emotion, and promises Takuto she'll always be by his side. The next day, Takuto and the twins stand outside the newly built clinic. Maria asks if he's sick, but Takuto shakes his head, saying that's not the reason. He explains they're here because their bodyguards have just arrived. At first, the bodyguards look intimidating, but they almost immediately reveal their goofy side, excitedly saying what an honor it is to have been summoned by King Takuto. They kneel before him and ask him to command them however he wishes. Atu is pleased with their enthusiasm and says that they'll do just fine as King Takuto's subordinates. Takuto explains that he created these bodyguards in preparation for the worst, though he's only kept them on standby until now. He thought they'd be perfect for such a task since they possess the right abilities, though he admits he never expected he'd need to use them so soon. Carrier and Maria look confused and ask Takuto who exactly these people kneeling before him are. Takuto answers that they're his medics. Not only can they treat injuries and diseases, but they're also trained to fight and protect others, making them ideal bodyguards. Atu steps forward and tells the medics to listen carefully, as she's about to give an announcement. She declares that their mission is to protect Carrier and Maria as they travel to Dragonton, where they'll observe the culture and current state of the land. Hearing this, the medics cheerfully accept the mission. They add that while carrying it out, they'll behave like humans so as not to arouse any unnecessary suspicion. Maria gets excited upon hearing this plan, while Takuto reflects to himself. Seeing how enthusiastic everyone is, he thinks this might be the perfect chance to act more like a proper king. He approaches the medics and announces that although it's still early, he's willing to grant them a reward for protecting the twins and following his orders. The medics perk up immediately, curious to know what the reward will be. Takuto declares that he will grant them human names. He names them Ikiro, Gyro, and Saburo, instructing them to bear these names from now on. The medics are overjoyed, thrilled to receive human names as their reward. As Takuto watches their reaction, he continues to think to himself. He realizes that unlike in the game, the units in this world each have individuality, and many are fascinated by humans. By acknowledging that individuality individuality, he feels he can inspire loyalty and bring out even greater potential from them. But the medics start getting a little too enthusiastic, and Takuto begins to wonder if maybe he went too far by giving them human names. Wanting another opinion, he asks Karia what she thinks about all this. Judging by her face, she looks a bit overwhelmed, but still manages to say she's fine with it and that she'll do her best. Atu notices her uneasiness, so she gently tells Karia that if she's ever in trouble, she shouldn't hesitate to ask her for anything. Meanwhile, in the city of Dragonton, Mayor Antic is slumped at her desk, crashing out because she's exhausted from the mountain of work in front of her. Being mayor is nothing like she imagined it would be. When she first got the position, she thought she had finally escaped that wretched elven nation and earned herself a life of freedom. She always pictured falling in love with a handsome man, building a happy family, and living peacefully ever after. Instead, she's stuck working with the forces of darkness just to protect her city. Just then, her secretary enters and is shocked to see Mayor Antic in such a miserable state. Realizing how ugly she looks, the mayor quickly rubs her eyes, straightens up, and forces a bright smile like nothing's wrong. The secretary informs her that there are visitors. Antic is surprised and immediately asks if they had an appointment. When she hears that they didn't, she tells the secretary to send them away. She doesn't have time to waste. But then the secretary explains that the visitors claim to be emissaries from Minegra. Antic's eyes go wide in shock. She yells at her secretary, scolding her for not leading with that important detail in the first place. A few minutes later, Mayor Antic greets her guests with a polite smile, introducing herself as the mayor of Dragonton. But when she sees Maria and Karia flanked by intimidating bodyguards, she starts to get nervous. Something about the atmosphere feels strange. She sits down across from the twins and warmly thanks them for traveling all this way. After the girls introduce themselves, Antic immediately realizes they're dark elves. She had already heard that Minegra accepted the dark elves as citizens, but still, she can't help but wonder what kind of people these sisters really are. Karia tilts her head, confused, when she notices Antic staring at them, snapping out of it. Antic quickly apologizes, adding that she would have prepared a proper welcome if she had known they were coming, but their visit was so sudden. Still, her thoughts continue racing. It's unusual for emissaries to be such young girls. That alone makes Antic suspect there's something more to them. Then she remembers hearing their surname before. Lady Tonakopoli had once mentioned that there were two sisters with the name Elfur, personally educated by the king himself to become the nation's future leaders. Antic freezes as the realization hits her. These two aren't ordinary girls, they're incredibly important public figures. Knowing how much the king treasures them, she worries that if she doesn't treat them with absolute care, it could turn into a serious problem. Doing her best to hide her growing nervousness, Antic asks them the purpose of their visit. Karia is just about to answer, but Gyro interrupts, saying it would be better if he explains. He tells Antic that they are here in response to an invitation from Pepe, the staff holder, to come and play. He asks her to think of them simply as students learning about life in a new nation. Gyro explains that this is just the first step to building future relations. It's nothing more than a friendly visit for now. He also makes it clear that Maria and Karia are still young and learning, so he'd prefer if Antic refrained from involving them in official talks. Hearing this, Antic lets out a sigh of relief. She had been worried they came to start negotiations, but Gyro reassures her once more, asking her to treat them simply as tourists. Antic is delighted to hear this news, but she quickly realizes she still needs to be careful not to offend the girls. With that in mind, she urges them to feel free to enjoy the sights of their beautiful city. She even offers to personally give them a tour if they'd like. The girls are surprised by this, but Antic smiles and says she's already familiar with every corner of the city. Hearing that, the twins are delighted. As they walk, Antic continues to think to herself. She knows she needs to do her very best to get along with the twins and leave a good impression, since that would be crucial for future negotiations. For her, it's a win-win situation by giving them a tour. She builds relations with them while also getting to escape her boring paperwork. With that, she spends the afternoon showing the girls all the cool places in Dragonton. Takuto watches everything through one of the medic's eyes, pleased that things are going smoothly. By the end of the day, Antic waves the twins goodbye as the tour comes to an end. Maria then remarks that Antic is a really kind person. That night, the twins return to their inn and review the investigation they carried out that day. Karia asks Maria what she discovered, and Maria replies that she noticed the people people of Dragonton are anxious because of the enemies attacking their town. One of the medics asks how Maria managed to gather such specific information, and Karia explains that Maria is highly sensitive to the emotions of others. If she spends enough time around them, she can get a vague sense of how they feel. Hearing this, Gyro finally understands why Maria asked him to bring a special item. Karia, curious, asks what it is. Gyro explains that it's something Maria asked him to buy earlier that day while they were in town. When she unwraps it, it turns out to be popple grass, a special plant that can cause strong euphoria and hallucinations. It's so dangerous that nearly every nation has banned its use, possession, and cultivation. As Gyro realizes the plant is a narcotic, he immediately urges Maria to throw it away because it's too dangerous, and she does. Karia notices the plant was in good condition, free of bug holes, which means it wasn't wild. It was probably being cultivated by someone in the town. With that in mind, the medics agree that Dragonton streets are indeed dangerous, and they decide to be even more cautious when they go outside. The next day, they visit the Dragon Vein mine, and the twins are shocked at how breathtakingly beautiful it is. Just then, they run into a man named Vesta, who introduces himself as a businessman in the city. Karia thanks him for the introduction and asks what he wants to discuss. Vesta slowly steps closer, saying that since he's a businessman, he obviously wants to talk about business. He explains that he heard this land will be jointly controlled by their nation, and because of that, he asks if they're willing to cultivate popple grass here with him. Hearing this, Karia asks how Minagra would benefit. Vesta explains that popple grass sells for a high price, and he would be giving them a share of the profits. He also says he's willing to add some extra incentives to make the deal more appealing. Karia asks what kind of incentives he's talking about, but Vesta smirks and says this isn't the place to discuss that. Instead, he asks them to meet him back here after sunset, so they can go over the details. Vesta thanks them for being open-minded, hands them a scroll, and then leaves. The next day, the twins visit Antic's office for some tea. They admit that she has been taking very good care of them ever since they arrived. Antic replies that it's fine, since it allowed her to build a network with them. The twins then tell her that they're not high-ranking and aren't that important, but they do hope she relies on them if she needs anything. Antic finds that reassuring, then kindly asks them to present her in the best possible way to King Takudo, which they agree to do. Suddenly, Vesta and his men burst into the room. Antic gets angry at him for barging in without permission. Vesta ignores her and says he's here to get the twins' answer to yesterday's offer, since they didn't show up as agreed. He figured he'd come in person for the reply. Antic is shocked when she hears that the twins had dealings with Vesta behind her back. She realizes that if the forces of darkness join with someone like him, the city will be doomed. But Karia keeps a serious expression and tells Vesta that there's no way they would ever work with a scumbag like him. She points out that their absence at the meeting should have been enough of an answer. Karia then tells Antic that they'll handle Vesta and his men, and in the next moment, the medics step forward, ready to fight. That's when Vesta pulls out a syringe filled with concentrated popple grass extract. A single injection would make someone permanently addicted to it. Karia tells him this is a foolish move, because if they lay a hand on her, it would mean making an enemy out of the people of Minagra. She admits they may just be powerless children, but King Takudo, who sent them on this mission, is an incredible king. But Vesta isn't moved by her words. He declares that he isn't afraid of King Takudo at all, and that Takudo can do his worst. Then he orders his men to take care of the girls. As he walks confidently toward the edge of the room, one of the medics suddenly hurls a heavy sword at him. Meanwhile, Takudo is back in his kingdom. Watching everything unfold, he sees that the medics have the situation under control and admits he never thought they'd be so useful in this world. Just then, Emily speaks up, asking why medics were sent as bodyguards when they could have sent warriors instead. Atu explains that the medics were the best choice, because they understand all types of humans and have unique abilities as a unit. They excel both at killing and healing humans. They love humans, but could never truly become human themselves. That's why they're called brain eaters. Hearing this, Emily shudders in fear. Back in Dragonton, the medics slaughter Vesta's goons and reveal their true nature by removing their robes. Karia, with a cold look, orders them to kill Vesta. Vesta begs for his life, but Karia tells him that insulting their king is unforgivable. King Takudo always said that evil people are free to do whatever they want, and with that freedom granted, she orders the medics to kill him. After Vesta is slaughtered, Karia commends the medics for their work. She then then looks at Antic, who is clearly traumatized, and apologizes for the mess in her office. She offers to pay for the cleaning or even new clothes, but Antic just tells her not to worry. Hearing that, Karia smiles happily and thanks her for understanding. Antic, however, is disturbed that this little girl doesn't see anything wrong with such a gruesome scene. Overcome with fear, she ends up wetting herself. The medics notice and, trying to act considerate, say they'll wet themselves too. Karia finds this utterly ridiculous, so she tells them to stop and delivers a heavy dropkick. Antic's frightened expression quickly fades, as she actually finds that part somewhat funny. That was episode 8. Subscribe to not miss the next part and watch the next video on screen.